Like you said, my name's Wayne Hollins, and I also work with the Big Sandy Conservation District as their water conservation education consultant. I'm a certified rainwater harvesting divine practitioner, and I also instruct at Mohave College for hydroponics, composting, food forest, and whatever else they can talk me into doing. Not that I'm an expert in any of it, but there's a lot to do, and the biggest thing is once you have an idea is to actually go do something, whether it be small. You always start out small because then that's the best way to be successful. If you try a big project and you never get it quite installed, then you're going to give up on it because it was too big and stuff. So start small. I got some random numbers up here I'll be explaining as we go along. But the main thing, first thing you want to do is plant the rain, which means you want to figure out where the water is going, where it's going to pool up, and how to get it into the ground, which we'll explain that as we go along. And the second one is bare soil is bad soil, okay, because it gets pounded and hammered and compacted, and nothing to slow it down, hard to get anything to grow, hard to get any water into the ground. So plants and animals actually help too, ants even, help get the water into the ground. So if the soil is bare, you're going to have trouble getting the water into the ground. So we'll explain a little bit on how to do that. So one of the first questions I usually get when I mention rainwater harvesting is, what water? Well, there's none out there now and haven't been out there for a couple months, but when it comes, normally we get more at one time than we can handle and get into the ground, and it ends up, them washes out there, those are also a natural thing that occurs in wherever there's water going, but it's going because the water's moving too fast and there's more of it than the ground can handle. So the wash, what it's doing is dehydrating the landscape. So we want to do the opposite. When you get rain, and you get an inch of rain on an acre, you get 27,154 gallons of water for every inch on an acre. So if you live on more than that, you multiply that number by how many acres you get. And if you live on less, you divide by the size of the lot, whether it be half an acre, a sixth of an acre, or whatever. So that's a lot of water, no matter how you cut it. So when we do get water, we get a bunch of it. One of the problems we have in desert soils, there's no or little organic matter in the soil. And that's what allows the water to go into the soil instead of running off. So for every percent that we can raise the organic matter in the dirt, and there's a couple different figures here out there. One's 20,000 gallons, one's 16.5. And that is how much water, for every percent that you increase the organic matter in the soil, that's how much water, how many gallons can go into the ground instead of running off. So if you can get 3, 4, 5% organic matter, and it'll take some time to do that, a couple of years depending on how intense you get at it. But if you could get up to 3 or 4 percentage, that's 60,000 gallons. So that would be almost 2 inches of water that you could get that wouldn't run off. It would stay right where it fell. So, and that's what we want to do, is harvest that water. Okay, 326,000. That's how many gallons is in a acre foot. So if you got 1 acre covered by 1 inch of rain, 326,000 gallons. So remember that number. That's a common number to use when you got a whole bunch of water. Our book here, the county has put out for low impact development guide for flood protection and water sustainability. They base their figures on 5 inches of rain a year. So if the entire county got an inch of rain, and you get the 5 inches of rain for the whole county, which should be, some places will get 5 inches, the Wallapai might get 20 inches a year. But if you average just 5 inches of rain, that's 3.59 million acre feet. A lot of water, even though we don't get that much water. The Kingman area, a few years ago, we got an INA designated in the Wallapai Basin. Okay? That covers 1,212 square miles, and we're short 50,000 acre feet being recharged. A lot of water if you convert that to gallons. But our annual rainfall at 5 inches of rain in that 1,212 square miles is over 360,000 acre feet of water. So why we can't get 50,000 acre feet into the ground when we got 360,000 acre feet that falls on just that area, not the whole thing up to Lake Mead in this area. So, and part of that is what I just explained. We don't have the organic matter in the soil to be able to put the water where it falls. So it runs down the washes, runs down your little wash, runs down your driveway, whatever, and leaves the area just as quickly as it can go. And most of our design in the cities is to do exactly that, get it out of the area as quick as we can make it get out, right? So that's what we need to work on not doing. Now we know what we don't want to happen. Now how do we keep it on? The first thing to do, and the easiest thing to do, would be to put down compost. You don't have to dig or nothing, you just put down compost on whatever, especially if it's bare soil, because it'll cover the soil. That also, you could put mulch down either on top of the compost or by itself. Does the same thing, it's going to insulate the soil. It's also going to cool the soil so we don't have so much evaporation. You put down the mulch, you put down your compost. When it hits that, it gets like a cushion, so it doesn't compact the soil as much. But, which is fine, and it also cools the soil underneath there so you don't get so much evaporation. And you don't want so much compost and mulch down there that the rain can't get through that into the dirt. Because if it doesn't get into the dirt, you didn't really accomplish much. So you gotta, every situation is different because everybody's land is different. Either the soil makeup's different, your trees and shrubs and bushes might be different, your slopes could be different. So all that has an effect on how you're going to fix the dirt so you retain the water. So if you got water on your land and it leaves your land, while it's on the land, it's an asset to you. If you let it leave the land, now it's wastewater. You didn't get any use out of it whatsoever. So you want to maintain as much on the land as you can. The county says it only takes 2% of our annual rainfall to provide all the water that Mohave County needs, drinking, bathing, growing stuff on your property, stuff like that. 2%. We need to figure out how to pump less groundwater if we got all this rainwater that's falling on the land. What can you do? Plant. Plant trees, plant shrubs, plant native grasses, flowers, weeds. If you only have weeds growing, that's better than bare soil. Because every place you have a plant growing, if it dies, it's going to decompose and the root system is going to leave a way for that water to get into the ground, and you don't have to do anything. Now also, if your desert plants die, like you see a lot of the creosotes and stuff like that, it's dead for 10 years out there and it looks like it died yesterday because we don't have the moisture for it to decompose quickly. So that's one of the reasons that we have the problem with the water getting into the ground. So you can do hugelkultur. Anybody know what hugelkultur is? Have a hugelkultur bed. I got a regular hugelkultur bed and then I have a modified hugelkultur bed. Knee deep, some as wide as the table and longer than the table and different sizes, and I put my cardboard. Who don't have Amazon boxes? Threw my cardboard in there. Shredded, unshredded, it didn't matter because I wasn't concerned how fast it was going to break down. I put my junk mail out of the envelope, just threw that in there. Some of it I shredded, some of it I didn't. If I had sticks and stuff, I would throw in there. I would put in maybe some stuff that would have went on a compost pile and threw that in there. And then I had got a bunch of hay, so I'd throw hay in there to keep the cardboard and the paper and stuff from blowing out. So now I got everything up to about 6 inches below where it started at. So I also have rain tanks, rain barrels, rain 5-gallon buckets, rain anything that'll hold rain, sitting around gathering rain. So when it rains and my tanks aren't quite full yet, then sometimes I'll take those 5-gallon buckets and dump into bigger containers. But then when they fill up, I'm draining them out and going and dumping them in my hugelkultur bed. You got trees and you got shrubs and you got your other plants. That does a couple things. Cools the land, because if you go out there in the shade underneath the tree, it's going to be 20 degrees cooler than out in the sun. So there you go, you got shade. Now when the water comes down and runs off into the ground, it hits that tree, shrub, grass, whatever, and it kind of breaks the raindrops up. So it doesn't hit the ground at full speed, so you don't have as much compaction. And then when it falls onto your compost and mulch and stuff, it's more gentle. And if you look around your house where the water runs off, because we don't have too many gutters around here, it runs off and you can see right in the gutter where the gutter would be, your rain, where the rains come up there and compacted that ground and splashed the loose dirt out of it. And you got probably more rocks than you do other places. So that there's a lot of power behind all those raindrops, because you figure if it's raining really hard out there, that stuff's coming down and just beating the ground like little hammers, just compacting your soil. So that compacted mulch, after the water gets in there, protects the evaporation. You don't get as much evaporation because it's cooler. You got more water there that's going to go into the ground. So your water will last longer. What you do, your plants, you want to keep that organic matter. Its job is to keep the moisture within the root zone of your plants. And you don't want a monoculture, that's one type of plant on a piece of property. Because like a lawn, for instance, if you go down to Centennial Park, when it rains and you got all that grass out there, well, all the roots are the same length into the soil. So it's like pouring water on the table here. It can't go into that, so it runs off, runs through the parking lot, into the street, and into the wash, and again, out of the area. And that's because you only have one length of width to go into the ground. Now, if you have native grasses, trees, shrubs, you have different lengths. Say a mesquite tree, you might have 150 feet of taproot that will go down and get into the ground and be able to tap that. Where your tomato plant, it's only going to be like 6 inches. So it's important to keep that water within the root zone of these different plants that you may be growing out there. So now the other thing, you can have tanks which cost a lot of money, probably over $1 a gallon for the capacity of the tank. So they're pretty expensive, and if you're designing a water harvesting system, I don't care how big a tank you have, you never consider how much that tank will hold when you're figuring out how much water you got to control. The reason being, after you have rains like we do around here, we don't get them over an extended period of time. We'll get a rain here, we'll get a rain 2 or 3 days later, and 2 or 3 days later, and pretty soon that tank is full and running over. So you still have all that water that's coming down that you got to do something with. Now, the advantage of having water in a tank, if you can afford it, is that you can use it more when you need it. Where if it goes into the ground, it'll stay there as long, depending on how well you've protected the soil, how long you'll have the water. So big difference in how long you have to use the water. Okay, so anything that we can do to maintain that water on the land, rain gardens is a good thing. And that's, when you're talking about rainwater harvesting, we're not talking about you having to dig a swimming pool size area, a pond. If a 10 by 11 by 9 inches deep will hold 600 gallons of water. So if you have a 1,000-foot roof, that's also an inch of rain is 600 gallons. So that one rain garden would handle all that water on an inch of rain. So the problem being, sometimes we get 2 or 3 inches of rain. So now it may be time to put in another rain garden and have it flow into one, fills up, flows into the next one, and you can have as many rain gardens as you want to dig, and you have the space for. It's not really, you want to maintain that water on there now, so it'll hold 600 gallons of water in that rain garden. To increase the capacity of that rain garden, what do? We plant into it. You can plant trees, plant shrubs, plant grasses, ornamentals, whatever. So now it rains and you got 600 gallons of water in there. With those plants and stuff, they take up the water. So those plants actually increase the capacity of your feature that you just built. So you increase that same little space, you can probably double the capacity of it by the plants and stuff that you put into it. If you're wondering how to do those rain gardens and stuff, I passed out some little things put out by the county that has your basic facts and figures of how much space you need to do your rain garden, depending on how much roof space you have and runoff you'll have onto that. And it gives you the specifications for how big your rain garden's got to be to handle, if you got 2,500 square foot house, there's what, 1,500 gallons of water every inch you get. So what are you going to do with it? So that's why it's important to plan ahead. And now is the perfect time, since it's not raining, but it could come next week. And so you don't want to go out there and dig a rain garden, but you have a bare soil out there in your yard. You could go out there and dig your little basin. Could be 2 feet. Dig it out, plant you a plant in there. There you go. That's that much more water. It may not be by itself a lot, but when you look out there and you got all bare soil, you can do just little things that will add up. Keeps the water on the ground. How to do that here, Brad Lancaster, and you can go to his website and order them from his website, the 2 manuals on rainwater harvesting for dry lands and beyond. So the main thing is to get an idea of what to do, but then you need to go home and actually perform the job on the system that fits your area. It could be, like say, digging I call my places infiltration pits, because before it was before I learned about rain gardens and stuff. So try your thing with your permaculture is, number one, you observe what's happening on your land. See where the water's pooling up, where it's running to, because if you have your water running over here, but you put in your rain garden over here, it's like, okay, that didn't do a lot of good. So you can see what it is before you go out there and just start digging holes and stuff. See where the rain's at. I also recommend during summer solstice and winter solstice, you go out there in your yard, take pictures. When the sun comes up at noon and when the sun goes down, take pictures of your open areas, your trees, your shrubs, your buildings, and see where the shade is. And that will tell you where you need to plant some of your plants. If you have a plant that needs sun, you don't want to put it in the shade. So all that's good information to have ahead of time, and you won't necessarily remember it when you go out there to plant or dig a rain garden or a basin or whatever. But if you have it on a photo or a video even, you can look at that later. Same thing when it's raining. Go out there when it's raining and see where the water is flowing, where it's puddling, and then see why it's puddling after it quits raining. So, because if it's puddling and just staying there, it may not be the place that you really want to have it unless you do some extensive fixing of the soil. Have a lot of clay, caliche around here. So if you go out there and dig you a basin, stick you a tree in it, and you got a lot of clay, you may be just killing trees. So you got to plant the right plant in the right place. This is mainly for farmers and ranchers and bigger areas. Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown. He went from a conventional agriculture on this land in, I think it was South Dakota. And he had a terrible 4 years when he first took over because he kept having storms that destroyed the plantings. So he didn't make any money because every time it would start coming up, they'd have a storm and just wipe him out. So he's like, I can't keep doing this. So then he changed his way of farming the soil and feeding the soil instead of feeding the plants. Okay, and that's the big thing is you got to have the plants in the ground, because that's what the plants, they take the carbon out of the air and puts it in the soil. So when you got that mulch and compost on top of the soil, that's okay, but it didn't do anything to the ground underneath it. So if you plant plants in there and they're taking that carbon out of the air and sticking it in the soil, that's improving the organic matter. So again, every percent of organic matter that you can raise up the soil, that's 20,000 gallons of water that goes in that doesn't run off. Have less damage to the roads around here, because we have a lot of dirt roads. Have a lot of less damage to your own property. You slow down the both the wind erosion and the water erosion if the land is covered. So very important to not have bare soil. Another thing we like to do, and this is not only here, when the trees grow, the leaves fall off the tree onto the ground, we like to rake them up and bag them up and get them off the property. Well, they're called leaves for a reason. You're supposed to leave them where they fall, because that tree spent all year long mining those nutrients and stuff out of the ground, putting into the tree, and then falling off. So it's got exactly what it needs to feed that tree by its own leaves and what have you. So it doesn't need all this input, chemicals and all this stuff. It will feed itself. But again, you don't necessarily want a foot of that stuff on the ground, because the water, you get so much duff on the ground or compost mulch that the water actually can't get through that to get to the ground to feed the plants. Even your weeds, if you look at what type of weed is growing and see what that weed is taken up out of the ground, then instead of spraying it, you plant plants that'll outcompete that weed, and it'll eventually take over and kill the weed, because it won't have room to grow. So instead of chemicals, you plant the plants that'll outcompete it and get rid of it for you. It's maybe not as quick as spraying it, but you also, when you spray it, you just killed all the microbes and good bacteria and stuff that may be in the soil. If you go out there on your bare soil, you probably won't find a whole lot of microbes and good things in there. It's pretty much dead, because if your soil's above about 130 degrees, it just kills everything in there. So now you get your organic matter growing and leaving it in there. So if you plant a garden, when the tomato plant gets done, you yank the tomato plant out by the roots, chop it off at the ground, leave the roots in there. They'll decompose, and that's a way for the water to get into the ground. The same with your desert plants, your creosotes and stuff like that. The animals, they like to go in there and burrow into the base of that plant and hide. So you have habitat for the wildlife, and you also have a place for the water to get into the ground. Same with ants. I hate them things, because I got bit the other day on that one. But if you look, they've got an extensive tunnel system underneath the ground. When I had a big thing in the yard, I took and dumped like 10 gallons of water in there before it ever started slowing down. So that's a lot of water that have a place to go into the ground that it didn't have if you wiped out the ground. So, and again, I know about people's property rights, okay? Do whatever you want on your land, it's your land. But the consequences of you doing that may be a negative for your whole neighborhood, not just, oh, my land, I can do anything. Well, if it's bare and the water runs off of that and damages your neighbor, he may not be so happy with you. Or if you go do something that makes water run onto his land and damages his land that it didn't before, you need to be aware of that also. Cheap way to get your compost, gets rid of your waste, cuts down the stuff going to the landfill, extends the life of the landfill, saves the county millions of dollars. Okay, we have all this yard waste that's collected by the landscapers and stuff, goes to the landfill, or goes to the water treatment plant out here and have a humongous pile out there. Not doing anybody any good. We got to get that stuff ground up and make mulch and get out to the people who can use it. And then we have an asset instead of something that's going to go into our landfill and take up the space. Because when you close a landfill, that's millions of dollars over a period of time, and we have a budget set up just for that. So if we can extend the landfill life 5 or 10 years, that's a lot of money. And we can also increase our water, our plant growing capacity. We have evapotranspiration. They say we have too much of it. I say we don't have enough of it. Now the evaporation, that's water that, say, hit this table and evaporated and it didn't get used by a plant or a person or whatever. But if it goes into the ground and the plant uses it and it transpires it up into the atmosphere, it cooled the soil, watered the soil so we could grow plants, increased our organic matter in there, goes up into the air, that's where we get rain. That's why we get 20 inches of rain in the Wallapai and 5 inches down in Bullhead. No trees. So the thing to do, which the farmers have did, they planted trees. They could have did it better because all that space between the trees is bare. And the other thing, you out there, I don't know if you're around here, but go down to the parks and they're watering the trees and plants. So you got the tree here and the water thing's right here, but yet the canopy's out here. Well, those trees are shaped like a tree for a reason. The water comes down, runs out the outer of it, and falls into the drip line of the tree. So that's where the roots go out there and take up the water is out there on the drip line. If no longer, when the tree grows, you got to move your place where you're watering the tree for it to be more effective. So if it's more effective, it takes less water to water that tree. Also in these books, if you want to know what to plant where and how much water a specific plant takes, you can look in here and it'll tell you. If you're growing citrus, it could be 8,000 gallons a year to water a citrus tree. That's a lot of water. Where your mesquite, it may take a fraction of that. Plus it can go way, way down and get that water. So to get more water into the ground on a big scale is a whole different another class, another idea, and it takes more equipment and money to do that, but you can still do it relatively cheaply, because if you're going out there and digging a swale, say on your land you got 5 acres, whatever, and you need a swale that's a couple feet wide, you can do that with a shovel and maybe a pick every once in a while and put that in and keep the water down. Now, one thing when you're doing the rain gardens and swales and that type of thing, you want to do those on contour, and you want the bottom of the system, whether it be a rain garden, the swale or whatever, you want that flat, pretty flat. You don't want it to be a ditch where it runs from one end to the other. You want it to go into the ditch, spread out, and then it'll seep into the ground and go. And if you have room to put another one down, it'll go through that, start running again, put it in another swale, and it'll catch the water in that swale. And you can do that over as much land as you got, depending on the slope of the land. So again, everybody's land and stuff is going to be different. So maybe you have a place you have a lot of problem with the water running, but it's really rocky. Pretty easy again. You line up the rocks on contour, and it does the same thing. The water runs down there, spreads out along those rocks, runs through it and down to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and what have you. So it's you just have to look at what you have and the problems you have and figure out what will work best for you on your property. Because what happens is not, what I do on my land may not work on your land, because the soil might be different, the slopes are different, the plants are different, all that stuff. So those things are what you need to consider on your own property. So my challenge with this after you're done is to go look at your land, see what you can do. Now, we have this water. We can use it once, but we can also stack functions with it. So the water falls out of the sky, goes down, fills up your water tank, fills up your rain garden, waters the plants and what have you. That plant, that tree, takes that water, grows up, he's going to give you shade. He could also give you food. So now you have that one water that you got, but now you got shade, cools the soil, cools the thing, lessens the evaporation, and also feeds you. And then, depending on the tree, you might be able to cut it down and have fuel for whatever. So the more you can use that same water more than once, the better off we are. That much less water we got to pump. That much less water we got to stop in the washes from going down the washes. So the washes, roadsides and what have you, if you look how we've designed most of those things, we keep them kind of bare. We should be letting the weeds and shrubs and stuff grow in those, because when the water's running down there and going through that grasses and trees and stuff like that, it's not only slowing it down, it's settling the silt out of it, so the water that does run off is cleaner and can be used without going down there, and you have to go out here and dig up the road and take all that silt that washed out into the road and haul it off. Saves you money, saves you tax money. Just things that we could be doing that we don't think about, but makes sense, because we only get the 5 inches of rain maybe. So if we don't take advantage of that 5 inches of rain, it's not like we may get a bunch more. Now, in the news, you can see every day water's in the news, water in the Colorado River, or the water that's not in the Colorado River. But we have that much water we didn't use. Most of it ran off because it couldn't soak in. So our job is to put more organic matter into the soil. Don't scrape the land and keep it bare, because you just made wind and water erosion possible. We also have valley fever in our soils that now we don't have anything to hold the soil down, so when it blows, it comes out and spreads, and that'll kill your dogs, kill your neighbors, kill yourself, whatever. So keeping that stuff contained is a big deal. So if you're doing, again, if you want to scrape your land, have at it. But just realize what that does to you and our environment. We're on an unconfined aquifer here, which means the water, when it goes down and it rains and goes down the wash and goes into the ground, the water, that brings the water table up, because that unconfined aquifer is on top of bedrock, clay, caliche, whatever, and those are at different depths. So the more water we can get into the ground, the higher the water table will be. The less deeper well's got to be to reach that water. And again, 50,000 acre feet, 360,000 acre feet of water. Why are we pumping so much water? Why don't we just use what's on there? Water rights. All the waters of the US. That only applies to about a handful of washers around here that even have an effect on. Another misconception is if you have a wash going through your property, you can't do anything. If you got the Sacramento wash going through your property, you're probably right, you can't do anything. But if you got a little wash, where it enters your property and where it leaves your property has to stay the same. But you can make it go wherever you want to. You can sink it into the ground, you can direct it, have it meander through there and have your nice little, with that river float thing that they do and stuff like that through there, and keeping all that water on your properties and stuff. So there is a lot you can do. Some of it takes a little bit more work than others, but again, I started using the half moon smiles. If you go on YouTube, there's all kinds of information. You can find the books on there and everything. So there's a lot of information that's handily available. So you can look at that and go out and do it. So I've started using more of the half moon smiles. So, and they're pretty easy to dig. You can dig one depending on how big you want to go, an hour or two, depending on the soil also. So just dig those, and those again are on contour. And the bottoms are level and the berms are down on the low side, so the water back up in there. And then you don't build just one of them, you built a series of them and you offset them. You got one row on the contour, and the next one you offset it so the water fills up here, runs over and fills up the next one, and then the next one, and goes on down there. So you end up having a lot of water that you can catch with, and again, you don't have to put them all in one day. It's kind of hot out there, so you build one and go out there a few days later after you recover and build you another one. And you can, they have a specific size that they use for when they're doing the landscape development on there, but you can do one 2 or 3 feet. You can do a regular one 15 feet by 6 feet or whatever, you know. So whatever, how much work you want to do, that's up to you. But you got to do something. Because every gallon that we can keep on our land and use is a gallon that didn't run off and not being used by anybody. Ends up going to the river maybe, but once it hits that, it's not doing us any good. So maintaining your soil, maintaining your water. That's all going to benefit you. Cool your land. You don't have to run the air conditioner as much. Plant your trees east and west and to the north, and that'll shade your house. Use utilities. If you're building a house, most people don't think of the orientation of the sun and what it's going to do to that house. If you position it right, you could save 50% on your utilities just by positioning your house on your land properly. And again, that's all in these books. So I would recommend getting those books and using them. Mine's pretty well used, but and just try something. The most you can do is mess it up, but you dug it with a shovel, you can fill it in with a shovel. So, it's not a forever mistake. You just gotta go out there and do it and see what happens. Because that's part of it, of observing. You observe the situation, you do something, and then you observe how it reacted, if it did what you wanted it to or whatever. When I did my first infiltration pits, it didn't rain for 6 months. It's like, I'm waiting to observe, but there's nothing to observe yet. So you got to take into consideration how long I had to wait to see if it was actually going to work.